Great Expectations is the 13th novel by Charles Dickens and his penultimate completed novel. The novel is a Bildungsroman and depicts the education of an orphan nicknamed Pip. It is Dickens' second novel, after David Copperfield, to be fully narrated in the first person. The novel was first published as a serial in Dickens's weekly periodical All the Year Round from December 1860 to August 1861. In October 1861, Chapman and Hall published the novel in 3 volumes. The novel is set in Kent and London in the early to mid-19th century and contains some of Dickens's most celebrated scenes, starting in a graveyard where the young Pip is accosted by the escaped convict Abel Magwitch. Great Expectations is full of extreme imagery, poverty, prison ships and chains, and fights to the death, and has a colorful cast of characters who have entered popular culture. These include the eccentric Miss Havisham, the beautiful but cold Estella, and Joe Gargery, the unsophisticated and kind blacksmith. Dickens's themes include wealth and poverty, love and rejection, and the eventual triumph of good over evil. Great Expectations, which is popular with both readers and literary critics, it has been translated into many languages and adapted numerous times into various media. The novel was very widely praised. Although Dickens's contemporary Thomas Carlyle referred to it disparagingly as that Pip nonsense, he nevertheless reacted to each fresh installment with roars of laughter. Later, George Bernard Shaw praised the novel, describing it as all of one piece and consistently truthful. During the serial publication, Dickens was pleased with public response to Great Expectations and its sales. When the plot first formed in his mind, he called it a very fine, new, and grotesque idea. In the 21st century, the novel retains good standing among literary critics, and in 2003, it was ranked 17th on the BBC's The Big Read poll. Plot summary. The book includes 3 stages of Pip's expectations. First stage, Philip Pip is a 7-year-old orphan who lives with his hot-tempered older sister and her kindly blacksmith husband Joe on the coastal marshes of Kent. On Christmas Eve 1812, Pip visits the graves of his parents and siblings. There, he unexpectedly encounters an escaped convict who threatens to kill him if he does not bring back food and tools. Pip steals a file from among Joe's tools and a pie and brandy that were meant for Christmas dinner, which he delivers to the convict. That evening, Pip's sister is about to look for the missing pie when soldiers arrive and ask Joe to mend some shackles. Joe and Pip accompany them into the marshes to recapture the convict, who is fighting with another escaped convict. The first convict confesses to stealing food, clearing Pip. Pip is ashamed of Joe at Satis House by Francis Arthur Fraser. A few years later, Miss Havisham, a wealthy and reclusive spinster who lives in dilapidated Satis House wearing her old wedding dress after having been jilted at the altar, asks Mr. Pumblechook, a relative of the Gargerys, to find a boy to visit her. Pip visits Miss Havisham and falls in love with Estella, her adopted daughter. Estella is aloof and hostile to Pip, which Miss Havisham encourages. During one visit, another boy picks a fistfight with Pip, where Pip easily gains the upper hand. Estella watches and allows Pip to kiss her afterwards. Pip visits Miss Havisham regularly until he is old enough to learn a trade. Joe accompanies Pip for the last visit to Miss Havisham, at which she gives Pip money to become an apprentice blacksmith. Joe's surly assistant, Dolge Orlick, is envious of Pip and dislikes Mrs. Joe. Orlick also complains Joe says he needs to take Pip somewhere midday, thinking this is another sign of favoritism, of which Joe assures him he can quit work for the day. When Pip and Joe are away from the house, Joe's wife is brutally attacked, leaving her unable to speak or do her work. When Pip sees a leg iron was the weapon used in the attack, he becomes worried, believing that it was the same leg iron he helped liberate the convict from. Now bedridden, Mrs. Joe is unable to be as rampaging towards Pip as before the attack. Pip's former schoolmate Biddy joins the household to help with her care. Miss Havisham with Estella and Pip. Art by H. M. Brock. 4 years into Pip's apprenticeship, Mr. Jaggers, a lawyer, informs him that he has been provided with money from an anonymous patron, allowing him to become a gentleman. Presuming that Miss Havisham is his benefactress, Pip visits her before leaving for London. Second stage. Pip's first experience with urban England is a shock, For London is not the soft white city Pip imagined, but a place of heavy litter and filth. Pip moves into Barnard's Inn with Herbert Pocket, the son of his tutor, Matthew Pocket, who is Miss Havisham's cousin. Pip realizes Herbert is the boy he fought with years ago. Herbert tells Pip how Miss Havisham was defrauded and deserted by her fiancé. Pip meets fellow pupils, Bentley Drummle, a brood of a man from a wealthy noble family, and Startop, who is a more agreeable colleague. Jaggers disperses the money Pip needs. During a visit, Pip meets Jaggers' housekeeper Molly, a former convict. When Joe visits Pip at Barnard's Inn, Pip is ashamed to be seen with him. Joe relays a message from Miss Havisham that Estella will be visiting her. Pip returns there to meet Estella and is encouraged by Miss Havisham, but he avoids visiting Joe. He is disquieted to see Orlick now in service to Miss Havisham. He mentions his misgivings to Jaggers, who promises Orlick's dismissal. Back in London, Pip and Herbert exchange their romantic secrets. Pip adores Estella, and Herbert is engaged to Clara. Pip meets Estella when she is sent to Richmond to be introduced into society. Pip and Herbert build up debts. Mrs. Joe dies, and Pip returns to his village for her funeral. Pip's income is fixed at £500, equivalent to £53,000 in 2023, per annum when he comes of age at 21. With the help of Jaggers' clerk, John Wemmick, Pip plans to help advance Herbert's future prospects by anonymously securing him a position with the shipbroker, Clarriker's. Pip takes Estella to Sada's house, where she and Miss Havisham quarrel over Estella's coldness. In London, Drummle outrages Pip by proposing a toast to Estella. Later, at an assembly ball in Richmond, Pip witnesses Estella meeting Drummle and warns her about him. She replies that she has no qualms about entrapping him. A week after his 23rd birthday, Pip learns that his benefactor is the convict he encountered in the churchyard, Abel Magwitch, who had been transported to New South Wales after being captured. He has become wealthy after gaining his freedom there, but cannot return to England on pain of death. However, he returns to see Pip, who was the motivation for all his success. Third stage. A shocked Pip stops taking Magwitch's money, but devises a plan with Herbert to help him escape from England. Magwitch shares his past with Pip and reveals that the escaped convict whom he fought in the churchyard was Compeyson, the fraudster who had deserted Miss Havisham. Pip returns to Sada's house to visit Estella and meets Drummle, who has also come to see her and now has Orlick as his servant. Pip confronts Miss Havisham for misleading him about his benefactor, but she says she did it to annoy her relatives. Pip declares his love to Estella, who coldly tells him that she plans on marrying Drummle. A heartbroken Pip returns to London, where Wemmick warns him that Compeyson is looking for him. At Jaggers' house at dinner, Wemmick tells Pip how Jaggers acquired his maidservant Molly, rescuing her from the gallows when she was accused of murder. A remorseful Miss Havisham tells Pip how she raised Estella to be unfeeling and heartless ever since Jaggers brought her in as an infant with no information on her parentage. She also tells Pip that Estella is now married. She gives Pip money to pay for Herbert's position at Clarriker's and asks for his forgiveness. As Pip is about to leave, Miss Havisham's dress catches fire, and Pip injures himself in an unsuccessful attempt to save her. Realizing that Estella is the daughter of Molly and Magwitch, Pip is discouraged by Jaggers from acting on his suspicions. Magwitch makes himself known to Pip. A few days before Magwitch's planned escape, Pip is tricked by an anonymous letter into going to a sluice house near his old home, where he is seized by Orlick, who intends to murder him and freely admits to injuring Pip's sister. As Pip is about to be struck with a hammer, Herbert and Startop arrive and save him. The three of them pick up Magwitch to row him to the steamboat for Hamburg, but they are met by a police boat carrying Compeyson, who is offered to identify Magwitch. Magwitch seizes Compeyson, and they fight in the river. Seriously injured, Magwitch is taken by the police. Compeyson's body is found later. Aware that Magwitch's fortune will go to the crown after his trial, Pip visits a dying Magwitch in the prison hospital and eventually tells him that his daughter Estella is alive. Herbert, who is preparing to move to Cairo, Egypt to manage Clarriker's office, offers Pip a position there. After Herbert's departure, Pip falls ill in his room and faces arrest for debt. However, Joe nurses Pip back to health and pays off the debt. After recovering, Pip then returns to propose to Biddy, only to find that she has married Joe. Pip apologizes to Joe, vows to repay him, and leaves for Cairo. There, he moves in with Herbert and Clara, and eventually advances to become third in the company. Only then does Herbert learn that Pip paid for his position in the firm. After working for 11 years in Egypt, Pip returns to England and visits Joe, Biddy, and their son, Pip Jr. Then, in the ruins of Satis House, he meets the widowed Estella, who asks Pip to forgive her, assuring him that her misfortune and her abusive marriage to Drummle until his death has opened her heart. As Pip takes Estella's hand and they leave the moonlit ruins, he sees no shadow of another parting from her. Characters Pip and his family, Philip Pirrip, nicknamed Pip, an orphan and the protagonist and narrator of Great Expectations. In his childhood, Pip dreamed of becoming a blacksmith like his kind brother-in-law, Joe Gargery. At Satis House, aged about 8, he meets and falls in love with Estella and tells Biddy that he wants to become a gentleman. As a result of Magwitch's anonymous patronage, Pip lives in London after learning the blacksmith trade and becomes a gentleman. Pip assumes his benefactor is Miss Havisham. The discovery that his true benefactor is a convict shocks him. Pip, at the end of the story, is united with Estella, Joe Gargery, Pip's brother-in-law, and his first father figure. He is a blacksmith who is always kind to Pip and the only person with whom Pip is always honest. Joe is disappointed when Pip decides to leave his home to live in London to become a gentleman rather than be a blacksmith in business with Joe. He is a strong man who bears the shortcomings of those closest to him. Mrs. Joe Gargery, Pip's hot-tempered adult sister, Georgiana Maria, called Mrs. Joe, is more than 20 years older than Pip. She brings him up after their parents' death. She does the work of the household, but too often loses her temper and beats her family. Orlick, her husband's journeyman, attacks her during a botched burglary, and she is left disabled until her death.